since language needs constantly to be renewed, and poets are the people who renew it, writers in general, are always renewing the world by renewing the way in which we describe it to ourselves. So it's interesting to me, and for us, since the writing program at Bard has been going on for so many years. It was one of the earliest undergraduate schools that had anything like a writing program, but God knows it wasn't a program, it was just a bunch of more or less drunken poets who more or less hung out here, and a few drunken novelists. And gradually we began to sober them up, and about, I guess, 40 years ago, it began to become more serene and boring, the way academic programs are. But the beautiful thing about it is that year after year after year, wonderful writers come to Bard. They come already equipped with an intensity of language, an intensity of belief in language, an intensity of moral courage to be writers, because moral courage is what writers need more than anything else, even more than a command of English. There are writers, like you think of Theodore Dreiser, whom you don't want to read one sentence of if you didn't have to, but nonetheless writers of some stature because of that courage. So what's been happening here for all the years that I've been here is one wonderful writer after another appears, grows, gets better and better, goes out into the world, and becomes a functioning writer out there in the Commonwealth. And that's such a wonderful thing that recently, a few years ago, we decided we would honor that by trying to set up a situation in which writers of that kind who had been through Bard and are now out in the world would come back and give readings along with people at Bard who displayed that kind of verbal energy and moral courage that the older ones had displayed when they were students. With that in mind, we've had this series of what Jane Andronicki Bryan likes to call alumni readings. In our neo-sexual world, we can just say alum readings. But we've had a number of them so far, and this is, I think, the fourth in the series. And tonight we're going to hear from Sophie Strand and Kimberly Lyons. One of them is a student at Bard now, one of them is a student at Bard then. But I don't think you'll notice the passage of time as a very important distinction between them. I think we should go in that order. Sophie Strand speaks of herself as having been writing as long as she was able to hold a pen, from the day that she was able to hold a pen. It pleased me a lot that she said pen rather than pencil, because that meant she was already committed to a kind of definiteness, a permanency of inscription. She's interested, she tells us, in mycology and martyred saints and in Middle English. All of those fit together pretty well, except that the English were poor on mushrooms. They don't have much of a vocabulary for them. But so mycology has to be dealt with outside. She has worked powerfully in areas that we would think of as religion, as comparative religion, folk religion. And some of the work of hers that was most interesting has recently been published as a Metabeeson online chapbook under the title of The 15 Promises of Our Lady, which are a set of strange and magical variations on a medieval prophecy of the Virgin Mary given to St. Dominic, of all people. So Sophie will be reading first, and she'll be followed by Kimberly Lyons, who graduated a little while ago, and she's the author of many books, most recently of a book that I just got today called Calcinatio, as I would say it in my church Latin, calcinatio, I guess you'd say in classical Latin, the alchemical process of calcination, driving by fire, driving all the moisture out of the substance, reducing it to its essential chalk, the bone of us. And I yearn to read that book. She's recently published a book called Rouge, and a number of others, and she'll be reading them. She lives in Brooklyn, having come originally from Chicago to Bard, She lives in Brooklyn, where she runs the Lunar Chandelier Press, which has published many interesting people. And what more to say? Let me say this, that if it's not too embarrassing for her, of all the poets I've seen coming into Bard from elsewhere, I think Kimberly, more than anyone else, was already herself. She was the poet already. Others I watch grow here very quickly, sometimes grow into themselves. But she was, when she got off the boat, she was already herself. And we just sort of sat and watched and marveled at this process of how she became more and more herself as time went on. So if we first welcome Sophie Strand.